Hello, and welcome to Artgasm. I'm your host, Allison Moon. On today's episode, I speak with Zoe Ligon, a collage artist, an Instagram famous model, and a sex toy store owner. We have a great conversation about a lot of different things, especially pornography. So allow this to be your little warning to let you know that even though every episode of Artgasm discusses sex and sexuality, this episode we tend to be a little bit more explicit than even we usually are. We talk a lot about porn and magazines and beauty aesthetics and genitals. So if you are sensitive to those things, if you don't really want to hear about those things, or if you're in a space where other people aren't consenting to hear about those things, you might want to just use your discretion and all that jazz. But before we get to her interview, a couple of announcements. First, I still have some copies of Girl Sex 101 in full color to sell to you. I'm converting it into black and white, as you may have heard, so the last of the color copies are here with me in this very room in which I sit. And I have like a couple boxes left. I don't know how many left. But if you want one of the last full color editions ever sold, get yourself to girlsex101.com/store tout de suite and order a copy for yourself. I'll sign it for you. I'll send you stickers. Those are the two things I will do for you. I will sign it for you and I will send you stickers, and I will also appreciate you deeply. But that's a great opportunity to get this book before it goes away forever. Obviously, you'll still be able to get it in black and white at all the places where you can get books in general. But this is the last chance, folks. Couple of other announcements. So I'm going to be teaching a couple of workshops. On April 30th, I'm teaching in Portland. That is at the Close In Munch, which is at the liquor store. The Close In Munch is a opportunity for kinky weirdos to get together and meet each other, so that maybe you can be like, hey, you're into the same thing I'm into, let's hang out. Or hey, your wife is cool and maybe my wife would like her too, and then they can go hang out. The Close In Munch is a really wonderful opportunity for you to meet other interesting people who are interested in different kinds of sex in your city. Isn't that nice? Old school meat space stuff. So if you're interested, I'm teaching a workshop. I'm teaching a condensed version of my normal workshop, which is how to drive a vulva. I usually teach that in about 90 minutes to 2 hours. This time I'm teaching it in 1 hour so that you have plenty of time for social activities. So if you are in the Portland area, this is Portland, Oregon, by the way. If you're in the Portland, Oregon area, please do check it out. It's at the liquor store on April 30th. You can get tickets ahead of time, I think. If you're on Facebook still, you poor soul, go to the Close In Munch, and if you Google my name, you'll be able to find it. I also believe that they have a posting on FetLife. So if you are a FetLife type, go check it out there, Close In Munch. So, close in, like nearby. Isn't that cool? Then on May 6th, I will be in West Hollywood, and I'm teaching my full-length version of how to drive a vulva at the Pleasure Chest in Los Angeles. That is a free workshop, and because it's free, and because I like to think that people seem to like what I do, that class tends to sell out or have standing room only. So I do recommend, if you want to come to that workshop, getting there a little bit early. You can look up information. You can go to, generally speaking, anytime I'm talking, you can find events that I'm speaking at girlsex101.com. And then I have the See Allison Live tab on girlsex101.com. So if you're curious when I'm coming into your city, that's the best place to look. You can also sign up on my mailing list there, which has all my sex ed stuff. So if you're curious about my sex ed stuff, in addition to my talkie stuff, different kinds of talkie stuff, but that's the place to go. So I will be in LA recording that entire first week of May, which is super exciting because I'm going to be doing a lot of cool interviews with new people that will create wonderful episodes for your future listening pleasure. I used to live in Los Angeles. I have a lot of amazing friends and colleagues and old school coworkers who work in that beautiful way with sexuality and art, which is what Artgasm is all about. So look forward to those new interviews. And speaking of me traveling, you may have heard that I have a Patreon. I am doing a Patreon right now to fund mostly the purchase of a digital recorder right now. I do tend to travel. And so when I'm on the road, I like to do interviews with people. I did a bunch of interviews in New York. I'm doing a bunch of interviews in LA. I'm going to be doing interviews with people in Cleveland. I'm going to be doing interviews with people in Portland. So it's really helpful for me to be able to do interviews kind of just out of my backpack. But the problem is I have kind of a setup. I have a microphone and I have a pop filter and all these things, which is great. And I'm very privileged to have those things, but I would really like to be able to use a digital recorder to make better sound when I'm on the road and to make my setup a lot easier so that the quality that you get in your ear holes is better in general. So if you are interested in what I'm doing, if you want to help, that is such a great way to do it. So go to patreon.com/artgasm to show your support. And people who've already gone to patreon.com/artgasm, I am going to give you a special shout out right now. I have huge thanks to Tobias, who is my very first patron. Patreon? I don't know. You're my patron. Thank you, Tobias, for being the very first person to sign up to help the Artgasm podcast happen. You, my friend, rock. And you know who else rocks? Bruce Steinberg, who came in at the higher level to support the work and sent me a message saying how much they liked the first episode. And I'm just so grateful. Thank you so much. Especially when we begin any sort of new endeavor. It's really hard to feel like you're motivated to keep doing it. I love these conversations and I love doing this recording, but sometimes, sometimes feels like you're just kind of speaking into nowhere. You're kind of throwing your voice into the void. I'm currently staring at a gray wall right now, and that's all I have to talk to. But I'm imagining your beautiful faces sitting somewhere listening to me, and it makes me feel really, really proud and really, really happy to do this podcast. So thank you to Tobias and Bruce Steinberg for being the first two people to show up and be like, yeah, we like what you're doing. Keep doing it. Here's some money. You rock. So thank you. And I also want to thank a person named Melissa, who was the very first person to review the Artgasm podcast on iTunes. Thank you, Melissa. And you had a wonderful thing to say. You said you really enjoyed the conversations, and that makes me feel so, so good. So allow that to be your reminder. Allow Melissa to be the beacon for all of you, to leave a review if you're enjoying what I'm doing. You don't have to give me money. I really appreciate it if you do. But if you prefer just to listen and show support in other ways, by all means, do that. Enjoy my melodious voice coming into your ear holes for free. What would be great, though, is if you leave a review on iTunes. Right now, it's all just about word of mouth. So if you heard a guest say something really interesting or profound or thought-provoking or funny, and you thought, hey, my friend would really enjoy hearing this interesting, thought-provoking, or funny thing, please send them a link to the thing. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook. We're on the internet. We're all the places. So share the things. Spread the love. Subscribe. It's huge. I know it's annoying to have to bang this drum, but subscribe. It's a really big deal. It makes us be noticed by other people. And that just makes me feel, again, loved, honored, cherished, seen. So thank you to all of you who've been what I would consider early adopters. Thank you for adopting me into your bosom. I certainly do appreciate it. Finally, before we get to the interview, I want to let you know our next episode is our very first deep dive. I'm super excited about this specific deep dive and deep dives in general. The deep dive episodes are episodes where I just sit with somebody and we talk about one cultural artifact for the entire episode. It's an opportunity to super nerd out for about 45 minutes with somebody who's super cool about something that I think is really relevant, some sort of cultural artifact that has really influenced the way that we, maybe as Americans, as Westerners, whatever you would consider, talk and think about sexuality and the ways that art and sexuality intermingle, mix, reflect on one another, all the things. So next episode is our very first deep dive, and we're doing the movie Call Me By Your Name. I'm sitting with Michael Schulman, who is a journalist. He's written for The New Yorker, Vanity Fair, a bunch of really amazing publications. He's a super smarty pants. He loved the movie. I love the movie. If you haven't seen the movie, go see the movie, because we're going to talk about the movie for 45 minutes. You don't have to read the book unless you really, really want to. Michael has read the book. I have not. So we don't talk a whole lot about the book, but we do talk about the movie, and it's going to be spoilerific. So if you want to listen to the episode without us spoiling for you all the things that happen, go check out the movie, because it's gorgeous and wonderful, and I recommend seeing it just because it's beautiful. And at the same time, then you'll be able to understand the podcast on a deeper level. So that'll be the very first deep dive happening on May 1st. Beltane. How interesting. What a coincidence. I did not plan it that way. But we're talking about a beautiful movie about two men in love in summer in Italy on Beltane, the gayest of all the holidays. You can dispute me on that one, but I feel like I can stand by that one. All right. So without further ado, allow me to introduce you to Zoe Ligon. Zoe Ligon and I first met at Sex Geek Summer Camp, which we talk about at the very beginning of this episode. Sex Geek Summer Camp was created by my partner, Reed Mahalko, and it is a sleepaway summer camp for sex educators and wannabe sex educators. It's a really cool opportunity. There are a lot of different ways that sex educators can get trained these days in what we do. This one I think is special. Sex Geek Summer Camp I think is special because it's the first one that I know of that really encourages people to get to know each other really well and really collaborate with one another, treat each other as collaborators instead of competitors, which is hard to do in any profession, especially in professions filled with entrepreneurs. And I think it's so beautiful because there's so many opportunities to get to know one another around the campfire or at the creek. It's a really beautiful event. So we talk a little bit about it in camping at the very beginning. If you're curious about it, go check out sexgeeksummercamp.com and you can read all the FAQs and learn all about it there. Speaking of websites, if you're in a place that's safe to do so while you're listening to this podcast, I do recommend you check out Zoe's website so you can see the art that we talk about, so you can get a sense of what exactly we mean when we were talking about the X-Acto knives and the vintage porn and the yada yada. It's zoeligon.com. That's ZOELIGON.com. You'll see all of her collage work and her kind of beautiful lattice work on porn stuff. It's really, really neat. One caveat to that, the site is not so safe for work. So again, if you're in a place where you don't want somebody looking over your shoulder saying like, what the heck is that? I would recommend saving it for when you are in a private space to enjoy her art privately. That's my recommendation. So check out her website, zoeligon.com. You can also, if you're listening to this podcast on artgasmcast.com, one of her pieces is next to the show notes, so you can see one of the more G-rated versions of her pieces safely. That's an easy one to check out then. All right, without further ado, please enjoy Zoe Ligon. Zoe Ligon, hello.
Hi, Allison.
Thanks so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
So I met you at Sex Geek Summer Camp, I guess 2 or 3 years ago. We didn't really hang out, though, and that makes me sad because I heard afterwards how awesome you were. And then I'm like, I missed an opportunity to hang out with an awesome person.
I'm such a introverted extrovert. I'm like social. And then I'll be like, I need to go cry in my tent now. So yeah, it's really great to reconnect on an artgasm.
Artgasm, exactly. So what I think you were the kind of person where I'm like, oh, sex educator owns a sex toy store. Awesome. And then I Googled you and then I'm like, wait, does amazing art and visual art. And I'm like, wait, I need to talk to this person because I think what's the name of your series is Woman with the Good Meat Removed. Is that correct?
Yes. It's basically also what got me into selling sex toys too, because I was this teenager who was in public school. I had been in Quaker school my whole life. I was not really sheltered, but not like part of mainstream culture. So high school for me was all about like fitting in and seeming like, I was with the program and cool. And I realized that I was like, I need a visual art medium in order to express what's inside of me. I was like a classically trained dancer doing like ballet and modern dance. And I didn't have a visual medium. So I can't draw to save my life. I was just like, well, my dad has some National Geographics and, Life magazine. Let me see what I can do here. And it all started out super, traditional collage, kind of like, I always call it like Sergeant Pepper's style collage, where it's just like, let me slam a bunch of elements together. And I did that from maybe like age 17 to 19. And then I went to school in Manhattan. I went to Fordham University in Lincoln Center, not studying art, studying psychology. And I was going to these flea markets all the time to find like more magazine material. And then I just stumbled upon not only like pin-up-y stuff, which was like my soft entry, but I just like found these really amateur 90s photo shoot magazines. And I just was so inspired by like the kind of more like bare bones nature of amateur photography, essentially. So I just started experimenting with bodies. And I used a pseudonym because, oh my goodness, porn and my legal name, my goodness.
Oh, there are naive times.
Yes.
when we.
I mean, and I'm 25 now, so like I still feel like a kid in many ways. It's not like that was all that long ago. But it was funny because my family was like, "Oh, Zoe's porn collages, ha ha!" Like, and it was like I was lovingly teased for it for years. I was lovingly teased, well, and also maybe not lovingly teased by like the Brooklyn art community, who was kind of just like, "Oh, you know, this isn't anything special or new to us, but, you know, pat on the back, good job." But I didn't start doing the cutout style, which is specifically what Woman with the Good Meat Removed is, until maybe like when I was 19, 20. So this would have been like 2012, perhaps. And I just started realizing like I can work with negative space. And furthermore, we live in this world where you can't put some nipples on the internet, but other nipples are okay. And furthermore, how do we show the human body? Like I got very sick of like images where like somebody's hand is conveniently covering their crotch and nipples. And I was like, well, I can work with this negative space and fill it in with landscapes and sky and other sorts of textures and create like a nude silhouette that meets community standards, quote unquote, but also like tells a story of like what bodies kind of like can look like. I guess it's also just like a safe, accessible way to, not safe, accessible. Let me try that one more time. I have had a lot of parents and children look at my art together. I had like an art show at Art Basel in, I think, 2013. And there was like a mother and daughter like going through one of my art books. And it felt like it was almost like this like awkward but kind of humorous. There's some pieces that have an element of humor. And it almost is like, okay, I'm remixing and rearranging all the things you think you know about a human body and representing it to you in its composite parts put back together, kind of Frankenstein in a way. And somehow that makes it okay in this world full of censorship.
That's so funny because when I look at your art, I still feel like, oh, this is still very erotic, even though it's missing like the skin.
Totally.
like I think because of the signifiers. I mean, especially with I'm guessing some of the older pinup stuff, like the poses are so iconic, right? Like they're so clearly like what they're doing. So even though you've removed the actual like genitals or like skin and created this lattice work, you still like the outline is like, oh, that woman's bending over, taking off her panties and looking over her shoulder suggestively.
Totally.
Like there's no doubt of what you're seeing. So it's like, that is interesting to hear that like somehow it's become safe because I feel like almost like erotica is like porn and you just have to fill in the blanks a little bit more with your brain.
Absolutely.
Same thing with your art. The gestalt of what you're doing when you're looking at your pieces is still like, yep, that's where the pussy goes, you know?
And it's so interesting to pick it apart from the sense that like I am mostly using material that was shot from a male gaze, you know, like a hetero male gaze standpoint. And I notice how many things in the poses, and it definitely like differs by the decade I'm pulling from and the genre, but how many poses are truly bizarre and ineffective in the sense that like there's this one pussy spread pose that like all photographers love to have people do with their labia, where they cross their wrists, put a hand on either side of the labia and like spread it to the side. So you get this very weird, like crossed arms, like awkward labial spread, which like looks so beautiful and delicate. But then it's like you go through these magazines and see like every person doing the same pose. And I feel like I'm entering this microcosm of what it must have been like, you know, before the internet, before Pornhub, which has just, you know, thrown a wrench and everything. But more on that later. Yeah. And here I am, this, you know, essentially I'm like a Kinsey one, cis woman, basically taking these bodies that were designed for, I mean, while anybody can consume them, pretty much designed for a hetero male market. And I'm making them into something completely different. And that is a really interesting thing that I didn't even think about that I was doing until I was like, wait a minute, like I'm making this my own thing.
That's kind of amazing. And it's funny too, it's like well, I was going to ask, and I'm kind of scrolling through your website as we talk about that. And it's like, you do have some men that you do this too, but a lot of them are bodybuilders, I guess. And so you have, the shapes are very different in that you do to the male bodies.
Yeah. And it's okay. So I'm so glad you brought that up, because a lot of the issues I've had is diversity in my bodies, simply because I am limited to the materials that are presented to me that existed, during that time period. So during I can't really use much stuff from the 60s and 70s simply because the paper quality doesn't hold up. And men are really, if they are featured in shoots, like in hetero shoots, they really focus on the woman and cut a lot of the body out, or it'll be like a lot of like, isolated penis going on.
Isolated penis.
And unfortunately, that also means that like most of the people I'm using are thin white women. And simply because that is who photographers in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s were shooting. And I found a lot of porn of larger bodies. I found some porn of non-white bodies, but when I found porn that was like non-white, like it's so classified in porn, and you see this today even in search terms and keywords. It's like the search terms to this day are so offensive. And furthermore, when porn was in magazines, the most offensive racist titles for these magazines were used. But it's also just like, that was perhaps the demand at the time. But I've seen some really upsetting things to the point where I'm just like, okay, like I don't want only thin white bodies, but they're like fetishizing fat bodies in a way that I find really problematic, or they're fetishizing Black women in a way that I find really problematic. And I thankfully have been able to locate a more diverse source of material recently. There's a used comic book store in the suburbs of Detroit that I swear I just like clean out every single time they get new stuff in, because they have this little back room of porn, and I'll just be like, what do you got in for me today? But I realized, I mean, and obviously I was aware that like racism transcends like every industry, but like specific to porn, I became so acutely aware of the way that racial dynamics were depicted. And again, to this day, like interracial porn is a genre. And it's so bizarre to me, because I'm just like, I don't think of this as interracial porn. It's just like porn, and suddenly, but it's like when people are searching for these things and using keywords, the photographers and directors are literally catering to that demand, which I find so upsetting, but also eye-opening. And I guess, I mean, I'm going off on a total tangent here, but so the reason that a lot of the male bodies I have are bodybuilders is because a bodybuilding magazine was honestly the most clean images I could find, where like there wasn't clothing covering all of the body, or they weren't like 50% cut out. So yeah, it's interesting to have an art medium where I'm not creating new images. And I've certainly thought about, like, oh, I could take my own photos and work with those. And I would love to do that one day. But when you're working with other people's material, it is limiting, but it's also gives me new ways to work around the ways in which it is limiting, I suppose. So I think it's interesting that you noticed that, because like I have my art book, Woman with the Good Meat Removed, in front of me, and like looking through it, so many white bodies. And like, yeah, there's some penises here and there, but it's even hard to find like a penis in the sense that it's usually inside of something, or it's completely censored. There's so many magazines where a vulva is a fine image to depict, but penises are like, oh, well, the guys buying these don't want any dick in here, so we go no dick. We can't have any dick in here.
Right.
But then of course, like Penthouse and Hustler aren't the types of publications that are going to show quote unquote explicit nudity. So it's so interesting to see.
I mean, have you pursued trying to find gay magazines, or is that not something that's in your scope?
I have some, but they're just so beautiful, and I really just love them for myself personally that I don't want to cut them up.
I cannot take an X-Acto knife to this perfect butt.
There's some really beautiful stuff I picked up in the Oakland area actually a few years ago, and it's to this day I'm just it's so beautiful and I don't want to touch it. But I actually just got a few men magazines and I'm very excited to get to work on them, and I have actually been planning on trying to do less just girls and really less of just thin white women. That's just I'm really needing to take that up.
Well, it's interesting too, is the vintage quality. Do you work with modern porn mags too, or is it really just the certain eras?
Yeah, I mean, I do like the early to mid 2000s. It's so funny though because everybody in the 2000s shaved, completely oiled up. Everybody is it's fake baked tanned and straightened hair. And it's funny because as I've been asked to create illustrations for online publications, they love my images because I'm able to depict sex positions without explicit. It's safe for work. So it's again something I never realized. But I guess I don't tend to pull from later than the early 2000s simply because it just feels so modern. Or just in the mid 2000s, I perhaps stylistically don't like the way everyone was styled. Same with a lot of the 80s. There's a lot of big curly hair and poofity bangs. And I like that, but I've noticed that those pieces of mine tend to not be as popular because I'm just people are what's going on with her hair,
Well, I feel it just codes so clearly from that decade. Totally. I mean, you're just again, even with all of their bodies removed, you're yep, this was taken in the mid 80s. No doubt.
Totally. I mean, even just the manicures I find so fascinating because there will be so many up close hand shots, especially on labial spreads. And I get so many good acrylic nails incorporated from that. It's really interesting. And a
lot of French manicures.
So many. And as a person who was born in 1992, I do feel I have a sense of kinship with porn that really predates me, which has been fascinating.
So in terms of, I mean, this segue is interesting. You kind of mentioned your own photographs and you do model, or I mean, I guess, would you consider it modeling? I'm not quite sure what you would call it.
I mean, I've been thinking about this myself too, because I'm I guess I do softcore stuff, but it's on my own iPhone and taken with a Bluetooth remote. So I guess yes, I am perhaps an Instagram model.
I'll own which is a whole new category of art.
I'm I'll take that title. Fine. But I really wanted to be a model when I was 14, but again, I was a total normie. I wanted to be in bridal magazines. And I, that was actually really interesting for me because I've always more or less been around the same size I am now, but I encountered so many people who were literally just I can't even begin to work with you until you lose 20 pounds. And I'm what? I'm what? I'm already at the lightest my body has ever been, and I need to put on weight, I thought. So the stuff with bodies really immediately became clear to me that I couldn't ever really be a model. I also just didn't want anything to do with it. I didn't want to play that game. And I would get a lot of your face has a lot of commercial appeal, but your body, no, thank you.
Oh, jeez.
So true how the, I mean, I really hope that things are changing in that front. I mean, and again, so much of this intersects with porn. But I really, it's just so harmful, the images. I have so many body dysmorphic feelings left behind from dance and, just the images that were shown to me as the standard of beauty for so long. And I think I am beginning to realize that as a person who perpetuates images of bodies, including my own, working with what is considered like beautiful and sexual is a really interesting space to explore, because it's like I realize I suppose I have the power to alter that narrative.
Well, yeah, it speaks to kind of like the democratization of media that the internet has offered, and not so much like Pornhub and stuff, but the like just amateur porn, where it's like now amateur porn is so much more popular than it was because people can just record something on their iPhone and post it, and same thing with Instagram and all this, where it's like there's certainly plenty of the kind of traditional ideals of beauty being perpetuated. But I think that there is this slow creep of like, a fashion designer who does the stuff for their friends, and their friends have, average or bigger bodies. So hopefully that will change things. We see, fat models being just fierce and wonderful. And so I think people are starting to notice that a little bit more. But also, like amateur porn, we're starting to see like a body be sexual that we were never allowed to see because mainstream decided it wasn't aesthetically pleasing enough.
And I was literally talking about this last night with my partner, who's like pretty much a straight cis dude. And he's always watched like more alternative, like hairy bodies and, like things that are considered alternative in the porn world. And I realized that I still watch a lot of mainstream porn to this day, simply because the specific sex acts I'm looking for are depicted in mainstream porn. And I've really become so much more porn literate in the past couple of years. Of course, in selling sex toys and knowing so many performers and sex workers more and more as I, just like stay in the industry. But I went to the AVN Expo a few weeks ago, and it was really something that just completely shook up the way I see porn. I've recently listened to the series The Butterfly Effect by John Ronson and Lena Misitsis, and I cannot sing the praises of this series enough because I think it is such a sensitive, objective and yet subjective deep dive into the impact that free porn has had on not just the livelihood of performers, but the way we have sex with each other in general. And a major takeaway is that, I don't think that while porn is not inherently problematic, it's like this tool that's available to use. And now you don't need a credit card to plug in order to see porn anymore. So that means that kids have more access to porn suddenly. And we are literally seeing, the statistic was in this series, but the generation younger than mine, so, like younger than millennials, are having less sex than our generation. And it's the first time it has been a decrease. And a lot of that has to do with the reliance on a visual stimulation in order to have arousal and orgasm. And again, it's like not everybody uses porn this way, but we see people who, like an increasing trend in people who need that visual stimuli to also get off. And there's nothing wrong with that. But these are also the same people who are maybe not comfortable saying like, let's, have sex together and watch porn. Or, it's like, I think a little bit of not understanding how porn is a tool, and it's also fictional, like without any context, that is when porn becomes misused. But if you have the context, you can use it and like put things into perspective and understand like, oh yeah, like I'm not going to make somebody squirt this way probably. And oh, I can't just shove my dick into an unlubed anus. There's so many things that we've been taught from porn. And I think there's like so much good stuff to be gleaned, but I'm increasingly aware of how we need to incorporate discussion of mainstream porn, but also more like cinematic, curated porn into the way we talk about sex education in general. I know that's a huge tangent from what you said, but
no, but I mean, this is absolutely, I mean, I teach sex workshops too. And so one of the things I'm always talking about, and especially at universities when I get brought in, is to remind people like, okay, so porn is an entertainment medium. And if you can think of it like that, and if you can put your critical analysis lens on it, you have, I think it's a very rich experience of being able to view porn. But when we deny young people sex education, when we actually don't teach them about sex in a healthy way, we don't give them visuals and we don't give them education mediums that actually are designed to educate, all they have is porn. And it's like, it's one of these weird parts of society where we're just not allowed to look at something to learn how to do it. It's like we have classes for all the things, and we have, like, we teach kids about how to read Tale of Two Cities and how to like look for symbolism and motifs, and we analyze that crap all day, but we don't get to a place where we talk about critical thinking skills around sexuality and sexual images because we're so afraid of having that conversation with young people about sex at all. Right. So when you find it, back in the day, for me, it was finding the Playboy in the woods or in the parking lot, and nowadays it's like Google something and find out all the weird stuff attached to it. But now that ease of access means that you're right. I mean, it's interesting to see, like, it's this difference between it's so easy to find it. It's so easy to find sexual images. And at the same time, so maybe it is delaying kids having sex because they have a different way of experiencing sex, which I think is cool. And that's interesting. Yeah. And at the same time, like, it gives them really problematic ideas such that when they do have sex, they're trying to have unlubricated or choking or hair pulling without like a conversation about
choking. That is something that even in my own personal life, I am astounded how many people like mindlessly go for choking. That really blows my mind, especially as a person who doesn't enjoy receiving that. And like, I enjoy other intense sex acts that, obviously require consent and communication. But that one in particular, I really see people being like, oh yeah, the choking thing. Everybody loves this, right? No.
No. Well, it's so ubiquitous in porn, and that's why I think the kind of alternative representations of porn is so helpful in the democratization, because I think we're seeing a lot more like individual performers set up their own websites, and they're doing the things that they want to do with the people that they want to do them with, as opposed to the old studio system where it's like, oh, we just need 8 girls to do this thing, and you get paid more if you do these things, and peace out.
I think camming camming has been around for quite a while, but this was my first year attending AVN, and also, to be clear, I was there. I was representing this like a luxury sex chair that is really great for folks with like mobility issues, but it's also a piece of furniture that looks like a mid-century modern chaise lounge. So it's definitely like a Sibian in the sense that it's like, not something you impulsively buy. But I was like, they're representing this chair, right? And I knew I was like in for a treat showing up at AVN, but it was like, hallways and hallways of cams. And there was like a Pornhub booth, but like Wicked didn't have a booth. And apparently they had always had a booth historically at AVN. And just in talking to the attendees, I found that people were really like kind of amazed by how much cams had really taken over the, porn industry, in the sense that like, AVN, I think like very classic, like video networks. Like I'm thinking like literal like browsers, which was something that like, I think my first boyfriend when I was like 14 was like, here's browsers. This is what I love. Browsers. Yeah.
Wow.
And like these companies still exist. They're all owned by MindGeek and Pornhub now. But I thought it was very inspiring and uplifting to be like, oh, wow, all these performers like work their own hours and they have control over, like who is viewing them to an extent. And wow. And I mean, we're also talking the day after the FOSTA bill passed the House, and hopefully it doesn't pass the Senate and whatnot. But it's that bill. I mean, I only like know a medium amount about it, but it essentially is restricting access to pages like Backpage and the ability to like vet people online. Which is so crucial, you know, because the internet is a tool, and like screening people online is so much safer than attempting to screen somebody in person. And it really just is so limiting. And I'm definitely afraid for what the future and net neutrality laws. I'm so concerned about what's going to happen to the ability for a performer to like dictate how they want to present their art.
Yeah, I think it's no surprise to me, I guess, or that one of the few industries where women actually do call the shots and get paid more than men is one of the industries that we're trying to regulate the most in terms of.
So well said.
Yeah, and at the same time, like the sex phobia that we have in America, where we're unable to consider sex workers experts of their own experience, and we're so conflating, you know, consensual sex work with trafficking that we actually have no ability, again, as consumers, as outsiders, to parse out the difference between a person who enters sex work consensually and likes the work that they do and finds it, you know, financially and emotionally fulfilling, versus somebody who has no consent at all in the matter. And again, like we're so sexually illiterate that we can't parse that difference, and we can't listen to people who are saying, actually, not trafficked, actually supporting my family quite comfortably, actually enjoying what I do for a living. And that's
what's so frustrating. Yeah, it's like the people who like should and could be allies in theory kind of miss out on this important point. And I feel sympathetic in the sense that like before somebody explained to me like, no, this is how sex work can be empowering and amazing, and like it's, you know, and somebody explained that like sex work has been around since the dawn of humanity. It's not going anywhere. The demand is always going to be there. Therefore, the supply will always be there, and we shouldn't be punishing the people supplying it. Like once somebody just explained it to me, I was like, duh, of course, this makes total sense. But again, it's like until I had access to that information, I wouldn't say I was like anti-porn, but I was just like, sex work, that seems a bit dangerous, you know? And it's so I feel sympathetic to people in the sense that I'm like, okay, I don't think you potentially realize how this can be like executed in a way that is not harming people, and needs to be there in order for people to not be harmed. It literally reduces rates of domestic violence and abuse when sex work is less regulated or decriminalized, as we can see from places like Amsterdam or Rhode Island, who accidentally decriminalized prostitution once upon a time. Get some really interesting stats out of there. But I guess it's just like, how much do we need to shout this from the mountaintops before people listen? And obviously Puritanism and Christianity and conservative values. But then I also see feminists who also aren't aware of these things. And I think that there is a very interesting, like it is a partisan issue, yet it isn't in a very odd way. So I've been very intrigued by the nuances of this conversation as it so rapidly develops and is more socially acceptable to talk about in the mainstream. Like I, several years ago, probably wouldn't have felt like I lived in a world where I could, maybe that's not true. I think social media gives a platform to express views that don't, you know, fit the norms of society. You're able to kind of like have that soapbox, and it's been really exciting to hear all these progressive views that influence my views and be able to kind of like repackage and share that with other people who I communicate with. It's just like a spread of information.
Yeah, I love the access to different viewpoints. And I mean, as a sex educator, I would go to conferences, but a similar thing, I had kind of my own kind of unexamined ideas about what it means to be a sex worker or what sex work is or what it does. And then I started kind of stepping back and just listening, which, yay, good skill set. But I remember some people who represented the Red Umbrella Project, which is a sex worker rights group.
Yeah.
We're talking about different models for how prostitution is handled in different places around the world. And they were talking about different, that, obviously we live in a very capitalist society here in the States, but, in other places where prostitution is very much part of their lives, it's a labor issue. It's not a sex issue, right? So when we talk about like sex work, we talk about like when we talk about sex workers' rights in America, we're talking a lot about sex and trafficking and a lot of like dire horror stories. And in places like Thailand, they're talking about it like in terms of like, the people who work in like sewing factories, they have the same need and access to labor rights as sex workers do. There's not a whole lot of difference between people who are working for minimum wage in various ways around the world. And so if we can start talking about this in terms of labor and access to, to access to various systems that protect workers, that's a really helpful way of looking at that. I'm like, that blew my mind, and it allowed me to start really looking at like sex work as a labor issues and economics, and the economics of sex work in a way that makes it feel like, oh, this is just another path that people choose to pay the bills.
Absolutely. I volunteered at a needle exchange my last year of college, and I had no idea how needle exchanges worked until I was literally like sitting at the counter and they were like, cool, this is how it works. And I learned so much just like from a harm reduction standpoint. And obviously like needle exchanges this isn't an exact comparison, but as far as like creating access and safe resource centers. And we also did provide free STI check, like specifically HIV and hepatitis. And it was just so fascinating to like, be the physical person exchanging needles with folks. And there was just so many different reasons that people were coming in to exchange needles. There was diabetics. There was people using hormones for various reasons. There was people using steroids for various reasons. And then there was people using like IV drugs, I'm sure, as well. And there was even like nurses who came in and were like, we ran out of needles. Can we have some? Like, it was just like, and I guess like while needles are a completely different thing, I was just like, wait, okay, yes, obviously giving somebody a needle isn't like supporting a drug habit. It is making sure that a person has access to a clean device to take the drug that they're going to take one way or another. But you are, preventing the sharing of needles and disease transmission, and also educating them when they, come in to stop by and get their needles. And I guess I do see a similarity in that it's just like it's not like every person going to a sex worker is cheating on their wife. And I feel like there's this like very stereotyped narrative of like what sex workers are so demonized and villainized in mainstream media. I mean, even like Pretty Woman, it's like she has a narrative and a character, but at the end of the day, the happy ending is she no longer has to do what she used to do.
Right. And
it's like, why can't the sex workers ride off into the sunset happily as sex workers at the end of a story for once?
Yep.
And that's why I'm also really into Jack the Stripper these days, too. I really like the way she talks about performing and sex work. And she just released her memoir, The Beaver Show, which I quickly devoured. And I think that, again, it's like we don't have sympathetic stories about sex workers available to us. And it's literally like, just like we don't have examples of non-monogamous relationships depicted in mainstream media, I'm immediately like, okay, if only there was a narrative where there was a poly relationship depicted, and the main point of the story wasn't the fact that they were poly. It's not like just about that. we wouldn't see it as so other and different.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have like these templates to work with.
Mm-hmm.
So it's literally just like this giant wheel of propaganda.
Yeah, that's actually a very good way of saying it. Which, kind of awkward segue into what you do with your boutique. So I want to talk to you a little bit about your, I know, I'm like, segue. Spectrum is an online store, brick and mortar, both?
Yes.
Oh, just online.
We're online only at the moment, but my initial dream was a brick and mortar.
Mm-hmm.
I was not at the time able to work with the zoning laws in Detroit, and it's not unique to Detroit, but they're definitely more conservative than other areas, metropolitan areas for sure. So my father passed away 3 years ago, right before he retired, left me a little nest egg of basically what was supposed to be his retirement money. And I was just like, well, how can let me invest this in a business and something that I can use to sustain myself and educate myself and, create a business where I can employ and provide healthcare to people I care about in my community. And I'm finally at this point where it's this well-oiled running machine, and I'm hiring new people, and I'm it's just I feel so fortunate to have this career where I am able to express myself freely and give jobs to people who have also been, censored or told they can't wear something that doesn't match their assigned gender, etc. at work. So while we are a sex toy store, I've been really just doing a deep dive on the more social and cultural aspects surrounding what it means to sell sex toys. Everything's body safe, of course. So no phthalates. And I try to make all the discussions around toys both educational, but also, with a sense of humor, not have it be a super sterile environment. But I've really just learned so much from my customers alone. And I used to work at a sex toy store, a physical location where I would be speaking face to face with my customers. But so much of my day is endless email and DMs with customers and just literally talking through all the what somebody wants or what somebody is trying to resolve within their sex life. And so much of the time it has so much less to do with sex toys and more just the permission to talk about your sex life and sexuality and what your desires are and what they aren't. I endlessly encounter the person who wants a vibrator and is I am afraid that my partner is gonna feel emasculated or I'm replacing them. And it's I've been having these conversations for years now. There are just as many people, if not more now, who are wait, but how can I use a vibrator in a way that's not gonna make them feel weird? And I'm just these are tools. We literally have this toolbox available to us. Of course we have our hands and they're amazing, but a vibrator is literally a cool extension that you can add on to your human body.
Yeah, nobody feels emasculated because they can't build a house with without a hammer. It's just you should be able to slam that nail into that board with your fist if you're a real man. It's
totally.
Or you can buy a freaking hammer. I don't know.
Slam the nails in with your manly fist. And I find that the more nuanced aspect to this conversation I see happening lately is okay, my boyfriend's cool with vibrators, but how do I don't know about bringing a wand into the mix. It's now not about vibrators and more about powerful vibrators or wanting, being able to acknowledge it, but trying to minimize it. Or the reason I find this so fascinating too is because I, up until recently, was very copacetic with my partner's attitudes towards vibrators. And as a power queen and size queen, I was dealing with all the things of like, you're trying to deal with my love of giant dildos and huge vibrators simultaneously. And I feel a little bit of bad for you. So I'll, like take it easy on you and wean you into this, which I think, was like my own insecurity and vulnerability with toys. But I mean, like, TBH, I would not be orgasmic, certainly not regularly without wands. And like big dildos, just, the cherry on top. So it's really just changed from like, I was always okay with it for myself, but now I'm so okay with it that I like demand that others also be okay with it, because like, it was literally just like, I feel like I had done half the work of uncovering like, no, this stuff's cool. This is all right. I can like be empowered with these things. And then I've finally taken it the rest of the way, which I feel is so silly considering I sell the damn thing. But like, I finally have taken it the rest of the way of like, oh, wait, like you can't hang with me if you can't hang with my like giant dick collection. Sorry. Next. Well,
I guess that kind of speaks to, you being out about who you are and like being, your reputation preceding you at a certain point. Like if you're known as like that dildo queen, like that might mean that the people who are pursuing you for a relationship or sex are self-selecting to a certain degree.
Oh my God. Like, yes, on the one hand, but I actually have like a pretty bad situation occur within the last year where somebody knew who I was, and I was like, awesome. That means you're going to be with the program. Was so not with the program. And I realized like, oh, wait, this person thought that they got me.
Oh.
And then it was the kind of thing where it's like, it wasn't the dildos and vibrators that were the issue. It was the feminism.
Oh, jeez.
Ooh. And it was like one of those things that like I had to go deep into this person to find. And I was just like, the second I saw it, nope. Oh, yeah, that was bad. So it was like this false sense of security and somebody being okay with toys, and they were, and they liked me using toys on them too. So I was just like, oh yeah, this is awesome. Nope. Does not mean you are necessarily a progressive human.
Yeah. Well, and that's something I've encountered so much too. It's like people will come to my polyamory workshops because they want to be down with poly. But just because you're maybe polyamorous does not mean you're a progressive or feminist person. Whereas also just because you're a monogamous person does not mean you're some sort of conservative prude. And totally. I kind of have to keep on reminding people that, because there's this assumption that because you're DTF or because you're open for everything or because you're really kinky, that somehow you're a better person or a better feminist than other people who aren't kinky or aren't, whatever, which is such a damaging stereotype. It's very much not the case in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. And also like the lack of visibility of asexuality and the spectrum of sexuality, and the spectrum of monogamy and non-monogamy. I didn't even realize that I could think about monogamy as a spectrum until, the past handful of years. And I was like, oh, I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm a person who sometimes operates best with monogamy or being monogamish. And sometimes complete polyamory is best suited for me. And it's been really interesting as a sex educator who frolics around, poly communities. I do feel like I'm like the boring, like monogamous one sometimes. Although I have like a breadth of sexual experiences and variety of experience, I'm still just like, oh, you still think of me as the one who is more like a voyeur, than I'm more of a voyeur than an exhibitionist. And, which is funny because I'm such an online exhibitionist, but like you put me in a party, I'm just like, ooh, I don't want to do a thing or receive a thing, but I want to watch you do things to each other. Yeah. And like owning up to that identity and like my own stereotypes about like what being a monogamish voyeur entails. But yeah, my identity changes in that sense as far as like I have been a more kinky person in my lifetime. Not so much these days, but I'm sure I'll revisit it. And I think that to like, I mean, I know this is a bit of a different subject matter, but I have just been doing so much exploration around my, like, what psychologically got me to where I am today. And a lot of that is evaluating my childhood family dynamics. And like, that's some real heavy shit right there. But I think it affects us as sexual adults so much more than many of us are able to realize. And I don't blame most folks. It's like really difficult work to be like, okay, like, why do I continuously find myself attracted to men who emotionally abuse me? Oh, wait, I'm recreating the emotional abuse I experienced with my father and how I got yelled at every day. And that is my definition of love. And oh, wait, I can now deconstruct many of my previous relationships to be like, I wasn't in love with this person. I was addicted to the emotional abuse cycle. And maybe I never understood what like passion and romance and sex and love really could be because I was like existing in this like place of emotional trauma. So I have really done 2017 started with me exploring those themes, and like, not to talk about like our fucking administration right now, but I can't say that I mean, like, the election had a lot to do with it too. Having a piece of shit, abusive womanizer elected into office who says such disgusting things about his daughter on television and on radio. That specific dynamic actually triggered a lot of my self-exploration to the point where like I have uncovered so much about like that childhood complex I received essentially. To the point where everything has just been deconstructed and I'm finally like, wow, like I feel so much better, but it's going to take me a moment to get back to sex because I've only been having sex to please like the patriarchy. I mean, duh, but like I got to the specific root of it and I just feel like I looked inside the bowels of my mind and like, obviously there was no going back, but like current events absolutely were a catalyst for that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of a weird blessing to kind of like, oh, here's a stimulus to be able to start to deconstruct my own assumptions about myself and my sexual place in the world.
Right.
I wish that it didn't have to be this way.
Oh my God, I know.
But it is interesting how it kind of ties back to what we were talking about originally with your work, where it's just like you're dealing with a lot of sexualized images of slim white women, in this very consumerist, male gazy kind of way. And how that kind of transcends through all of your work and kind of just starting to work, like literally deconstruct it, right? Like literally peel away aspects of the body.
Sorry.
No, it's fine.
I guess I'm laughing because I'm realizing how I'm like not talking about work. I'm like, yeah, my business schmizness. Because like I'm like, oh yeah, how did I started talking about like emotional abuse from talking about my sex toy store? Oh, but no, like it's part of my origin story.
Yeah.
And I think that part of what makes me love selling sex toys to people is that it gave me sexual freedom. And while I don't think, every human being necessarily, you don't need to have toy sex, but it's really important for a lot of us. And if you want something, I am here to help you find it. And it's a conversation we can have together. And there's like nothing, you can't say anything. Like there's no newbie questions that are going to be like the wrong question. And I feel so closely I feel so able to access this headspace I was in when I hadn't had an orgasm, when I was pre-orgasmic, having sex with no anything, no pleasure for me, nothing. That I'm really able to just I feel like I can just access that time period and meet people where they're at. And if it's, them wanting to find the largest dildo known to, the planet, that's what, fantastic. But if it's also just like, I have no other idea what I want, or if I even want anything, help. Like, I love the emotional journey that we can go on in talking about toys. And it really is such a affirming experience to shop for these things. The first time I went into a sex toy store, I literally like ran the fuck out of there. I did not want to be in a sex toy store. It was too much of a confrontation of what was going on and what was not going on. It was like an acknowledgement, like I haven't been having orgasms. Here I am desperate to like figure out something. I'm literally grabbing something off of a shelf and paying for it and bolting. Like, what does that say about me? And I think that it's really, so many emotions are dredged up in shopping for sex toys. And sometimes, again, not for everybody, but I really am so down to have those hard-hitting conversations with people. And it actually really, I just continue to learn more and more about myself. So I suppose in that way, I really started seeing myself more as like a peer educator. Not that I'm not also just like an educator, period, but I also like being able to say like, I'm not quite sure about this. Let's do a quick search on Google Scholar or on regular Google or on Scarletine and see what Scarletine says. And like, let me give you my opinions based on the information we're finding together. So yeah, I guess I want it to be this like space where you can allow those emotions to bubble up for you. And it's an online space, but
Well, that sounds like a wonderful place to wrap it up. Thank you. That was beautiful. So tell me where can people find Spectrum? Where can people find your work? Where can people find you on the interwebs?
So Spectrum is spectrumboutique.com. We are Shop Spectrum Boutique on Instagram, and I am Thongria, like a thong with RIA after it. Rhymes with sangria. On Instagram and Twitter. And I still have my art book, Woman with the Good Meat Removed. It's a limited run art book, and that can be found through Ain't Bad Publishers. But also, if you Google, it'll come up on the old Google.
Awesome. So, Zoi Ligon, thank you so much for talking to me. This was a wonderful conversation.
Thanks so much, Allison.
And that is that. Thank you again so much for joining me on today's episode. I will be back next time with Michael Schulman, and we will be discussing the movie Call Me By Your Name, so go check it out. As always, if you are curious about any of the things we discuss in this podcast, you can go to artgasmcast.com to see a list of all the links. I have a link to the Red Umbrella Project. I have a link to a bunch of different concepts that we discuss in this podcast. So if you're wanting more elucidation, if you're curious about where to find anything, go check out artgasmcast.com and you should be able to find what you need. If it's not there, if you're still curious about something, if you're confused, you can reach out to me at artgasmcast@gmail.com or on Twitter at HeyAllieMoon. That's HeyAllieMoon. And thank you so much for joining me, Art Sluts. I will talk to you next time.